Hey everyone. All right, so hopefully everyone's doing okay so far in 2023. This will be a short video. We already completed the review of Clause 7 for ISO 9001 2015, so that leaves Clause 8. So there's a bunch of subclauses under Clause 8, which I'll get into in other videos, but this one is operations. So the operation of a company is of course important, especially when it comes to quality. A lot of what we already talked about in all of the other previous clauses are going to be discussed in this one again, because now you're actually putting different things into place. Actually, the next clause, subclause, is planning. So planning and controlling what you have put in place for a quality system. All right, so more to follow. Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well wherever you are in the world. So let's talk planning and control. That is ISO 9001 2015 clause 8.1, which is where we left off after the previous video. So we talked about planning in a previous video. It's an earlier clause. But this part, if you are developing a quality system, a quality plan, quality manual, whatever you want to call it, this is the part where you have to dedicate a section to ensure that whatever you have put in place, a system of documents for your employees as a business to follow for meeting whatever requirement your customer or client has, is actually followed through. So control is important because oftentimes you have to have controls in place for, say, documents, a central location for your employees to pull out the documents they need, control over the different documents you may have, because if you don't have controls in place, you'll have a whole bunch of stuff out there and you have no idea what it may be. So if something needs to be changed, if you need something new, then it has to be put through a controlled change management of some sort. If it's a meeting, whatever it is to discuss, there should be buy-in with the individuals who are going to use it, because they may know more than someone who may not. Because oftentimes, I've seen it happen many times, where leadership in that area, or even a leader outside of that area, is the one that has to update or do whatever changes is needed. They have no idea because they're not out there in the workplace, on the work floor, doing the work all the time. So they don't know if that change, that document, is actually meeting requirements. So getting buy-in from all the individuals that are involved in it is important. But 8.1 is really about putting in place what was talked about earlier in an earlier clause, and ensuring there's controls in place to get you what you need. Whatever you have in place needs to be looking at the risks that are involved, and hopefully you fixed or have addressed those risks in whatever documents you may have, whether it's internal that you're going to be using, or if you're going to have another company do stuff. Control is important. Risks are important. So that is that's 8.1 in a nutshell. All right, I hope everyone's doing okay today. All right, so I'm going to continue from where I left off. Talk about ISO. So clause 8.2 is the next one. That one is requirements of product or service. Whichever company or business may have. Sometimes maybe both. But the first subclause underneath it is talking about customer information, customer feedback, customer satisfaction. Whether a business has a communication plan in place or not, they have to have a way to show that they have communications with their customer, their client, methods, what they're communicating, whether they're getting feedback from their customer and or client, because that, of course, is important. We all are in business to do whatever is needed for the customer and client, whether it's creating something or providing a service. So we want to hear from them because we may have a different point of view than they do. So we want to hear feedback from them in order to possibly improve what we're doing for them. All right. So this subclause 8.2.1 about communication with customers it's an important one, and we've already talked about in previous videos. Customer satisfaction, customer service. Whether or not you have a documented system in place or not, if you're interested in having a good quality system, if you're interested in being certified in ISO, you have to have something to show in documentation that you have something in place as a process on how to handle communications with your customer and client. All right. That's why I've always suggested just having a communication plan in place that breaks down how you communicate, who do you communicate with, who's the ones communicating within the business, because sometimes you have a certain point of contact that is the one that handles the customer or client directly. All right, so we've already talked about this in previous videos, and it's going to continue to be brought up in future videos because customer satisfaction, customer requirements are throughout ISO and throughout a quality management system. All right. Hope all you out there are doing well today. All right, so I'm going to pick up where I left off on the last video talking about Clause 8 in ISO 9001-2015. So 8.2 is the next one, and that's determining the requirements for products or services. Now, Clause 5 and 6, when it came to planning and resources, touched on different elements of this. But when we look at 8.2.2, you really have to have something in place in some form of documentation to show that you are actually tracking what you as a business has as a requirement from your customer and or client, and how you are ensuring that it is in place and followed from beginning to end, ensuring that what you need to be successful is there. We already talked about resources being very important. It's critical that you have to track what you need to be successful, and it could be staffing, it could be materials and equipment and all that other fun stuff to ensure that you're meeting the requirements for your customer or client. Now, as I said in the last video, a lot of Clause 8 touches on ensuring that what was established is actually being done. Clause 10 is looking at essentially a management review to ensure that a lot of what we've been going through is being tracked by leadership. So during those management reviews, a lot of this will be looked at to ensure that you are meeting all the needs for your customer and your client. If anything's changed, if you have enough adequate resources, staffing levels, materials, equipment, software, whatever else you need to be successful. So again, a lot of these clauses tie together throughout, right? So we kind of touch on certain ones repeatedly, okay? But 8.2.2 is just ensuring that you as a business, whatever size, small, big, has what you need against the requirements that you have to meet for your customer and or client. All right. Hope everyone out there is doing well today. For this video, I'm going to dive into Clause 8.2.3 from ISO 9001-2015, and that is the review of requirements for the products and services, which is essentially you are getting requirements to do whatever it may be, and you have to ensure that you can meet those requirements from your customer or client for achieving them. So somehow, and again, it depends on the size of the company, you have to have something in writing, something documented to show that you're doing a review of those requirements. Because you're not even from a good business standpoint, you shouldn't accept something that you can't do, you can't achieve. So whether it's a contracts team, an operations team, senior leaders that receive something from the customer or client, there has to be a collaboration amongst the business leaders, whoever they may be, whoever's affected, to do that review of whatever's required of them and provide feedback to the customer or client. Because maybe not all times you can actually do what they need, and you might have to go back with some questions to get more answers. So really this clause is just to ensure that you have in place a method somehow to document a review of what's required of you. Because if you're interested in having a quality system in place, if you're interested in being compliant certified to an ISO standard, this is one of those elements that you have to show through documentation that you're doing. Change management, and I've said this in previous videos, is very important. You have to, again, especially for the medium to large size companies, have to have a method in place to keep an eye on changes, because changes happen all the time in our lives, whether it's our personal lives or business. But from a business standpoint, we have to have that method. All right. So just again, to reiterate, review the requirements that your customer and or client wants you to do. Ensure that you can do it. If you can't, great. You can let them know that. If not, you can go back and ask some more questions, clarification, say, hey, I just can't do it, with justification. And then just make sure that that change is communicated amongst everyone who needs it. Look at your documents to ensure that those changes are being captured, and then communicate the new revised documents to those who need it. Hey everyone, this is going to be a quick video because I just realized that I kind of touched on this in the previous video. So continuing to talk about ISO under 8.2, 8.2.4 is reviewing the requirements that are changed for a product or service that you're doing for your customer or client. So I touched on that a little bit in 8.3. You have to have something documented to show that you're doing a review of those changes. And if you can't actually do them for your customer and client, then you have to also look at your documentation internally that you're using for your employees, so that they are doing the right thing for your customer and client. So it all has to be documented in some way on the reviews and the updates to documents. Because if you want to be involved in total quality management system and ISO, you need that. Hey everyone, it's a cold and rainy day where I'm at, so hopefully you're having a better weather day where you're at. So for this video, I'm going to continue to push forward into clause 8, specifically 8.3. Now 8.3 has a number of subclauses that I'll touch on in future videos, because this is one of the, at least historically from what I've seen with different companies, one of the more complicated clauses within ISO, because oftentimes folks look at 8.3, which is designing the requirements for a product or service, as a manufacturing type of requirement. But in reality, anyone can fall under this requirement, even a service business or a service contract. So the intent behind 8.3 is having something in place as a company to design the system that ensures that requirements can be met for your customer and or client. Of course, you have to have something documented to show that. So as I go into some of the subclauses underneath it, it'll get a little bit more clear as to what is expected if you're putting together a quality system, and especially if you're planning on following ISO 9001 2015. What is expected for this, but it's all about ensuring that you have in place for your business what you need to be successful for your customer and or client. So more to follow with the sub clauses under 8.3. Hope everyone's doing okay today. So I'm going to continue talking about clause 8.3 for ISO 9001-2015. This was a new clause when the 2015 version came out. It's been a while now, of course, but a lot of companies, at least from my experience having interacted with a number of people and companies, really didn't feel that this was something that they did, but it is. So 8.3.2 is going to be what we'll discuss in this video, and that's the design and development planning. So oftentimes when you hear design, you're designing something for a project, housing, buildings, systems, but a lot of what the customer and or client needs from us has to be designed in a way that we will meet those requirements, right? So even in a service world, this clause will pertain to a company, because a customer or client is giving you something to do, you have to design a way to meet their requirements. Now, oftentimes when it comes to solutions, it may be in the IT world where you have to come up with a system to do something for your customer and or client. You have to look at, can we do it in-house? Do we have to go out to a third party and pay them to do something? When it comes to, say, construction, your construction buildings and whatnot, can we do it in-house as a business, or do we have to go to a third party to achieve the goals that the customer and client gave us to do? But you have to look at the entire picture to ensure that you have something in place from beginning to end for design and development planning. And that's, again, through documentation. So you have to have a process in place to ensure that you're meeting the requirements your customer and client gave you. And oftentimes developing a system in-house for you as a business to achieve success is important. So it depends on what it is. It depends on your business, depends on what you're doing, that you're designing and developing for your customer and client. So there's so many wide varieties of things out there. It's kind of difficult in a short video to talk about, but this is an important element for whether you're manufacturing something or you're providing a service to a customer. Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well out there. So for this video, I'm going to continue to discuss another subclause under 8.3 in ISO 9001-2015. This one is looking at the input into designing and develop whatever you as a business needs to be successful for your customer and or client. So some things to look at, think about when you're designing your quality system and the documents within to meet this is, what do they need? Of course, first off, right? So you need to design whatever it is against your customer and client requirements, first off, right? And then what may impact you as a business. You may have local laws, you may have state, national laws, you may have international laws. There may be other things out there that will impact you that you have to think about when you're designing, developing whatever it is. You have to have communication with your customer. So that's important. So from the beginning to the end and everything in between, you have to have a way of communicating with your customer on changes, issues. So that has to be part of whatever you're designing for communication. Who's going to be communicating when things come up. Again, like I've said more than once, documentation is important. You have to have documentation to show that you're doing everything in the quality management system. So, what's being checked, validated, right? That all has to be documented in some way. So these are just a few of the aspects that you can look at to ensure that you are meeting 8.3.3 for the inputs that are coming in to you to design what you need. It's all about what the customer and client needs, but you have to look at the big picture because it may not be something small. Because you may have codes that are required for certain things depending on what you're doing. You may be building something and you have electrical codes, right? So whether you're doing a service, whether you're manufacturing something, you're building something, there's always a lot of different inputs that have to be looked at as a business to ensure that you are tracking all of them and you're going to meet all of them for your customer and client. All right. Hey everyone. All right. So for this video, I'm going to continue to talk about Clause 8.3 and specifically 8.3.4, which looks at controls. So I've been talking a lot about design and development because that's been the main feature of 8.3. This one is about how you control whatever you're doing. So whether you are in the service industry or manufacturing, construction, whatever it may be, whatever you design has to have controls of some sort in place. Otherwise, whatever you have designed will not be treated the same way all the time by the employees. So controls are important, whether it's in a process, if whatever you're writing internally to document how you're going to do whatever you're doing for your customer and client, whether you are using a system. So if you design some kind of system, automated system, an IT project, you can have controls built into that as well. The whole intent behind it is that whatever you're doing needs to be done the same way all the time to give your customer and or client what they want the way they want it. Because if you don't have controls in whatever you're designing, everyone's going to do it differently. And it happens. I've seen it many times. So it's important that whatever you do, you control whatever that is. It could be as simple as a document, right? So without that control, a very good chance you're not going to be successful for your customer and or client. So controls are very, very important in whatever you are developing. And it has to be documented. Documentation is important. So whatever you're designing has to have ways to verify whatever you're doing, right? So oftentimes you have to have some kind of quality checks, quality gates, where you're checking whatever it is throughout the process from beginning to end, right? It all has to be verifiable. You have to have a system in place to document that, okay? So just remember that whatever we're doing has to have controls to ensure that what you're doing is the way it needs to be each time, and that you're verifying whatever you're doing from beginning to end for whatever you have put together, put in place to be successful for your customer and or client. And one. All right, so I'm going to continue to talk about 8.3. There's quite a few subclauses in this one as well. There's this one I'm going to talk about and one more. But 8.3.5 looks at the design and development output. So whatever you developed has to be to whatever your customer and or client's needs are. So whatever they needed, it needs to be that way. So within the entire process from beginning to end, there needs to be something to show that's being checked, right? So that output is accurate. There has to be documentation to check that. So verification throughout the process, validation throughout the process is very important, because oftentimes, and it happens, you'll find that at the very end is a problem. And then, oops, we just wasted how long to do what we just did for them. So it's important to try to catch things early on. That's why there needs to be something in place through documentation, checks and balances within whatever you're developing, whether it's documents, process, work instruction, standard operating procedure, whatever that is for your company, however you want to call it, internal process, or a system that you design to capture whatever it is that you're doing for them. There has to be checks within that. All right, that's very, very important. So, we already talked about in the previous subclauses the inputs and controls But all that is to ensure that what you're doing gives your customer and client what they expect the same way all the time. Otherwise, everything else was kind of a waste of time. All right. So the last part of 8.3 is 8.3.6, and that is about the design development change. So change happens. I've said that numerous times in many videos. Change occurs within our personal lives, within our work lives. It happens. So you have to control that change. You have to make sure that change, whatever it is controlled in a way that it'll be implemented the right way, and it won't have a huge impact on, say, what you're doing for your customer and or client. So if you design something, something comes up, you have to change whatever it is. You have to have something in place to track that and to organize it. And you might have to have change management meetings to discuss it, but there has to be a discussion on the change. Is it needed? What will it impact? And ensure that your customer and or client is involved in that discussion. Make sure that whatever is decided within your business with your customer and client is worked out with each other, because it has to be authorized. You can't just change something because you want to change it. So it has to be controlled in a way that it's successful for you as a business and for your customer and or client. So, work together, talk it out, make sure it works, communicate it, and just make sure it's authorized with everyone involved to implement that change. All right. Hey there. So now we finished the rather long 8.3 clause in ISO 9001-2015. We already talked about throughout that entire thing controlling the inputs, the outputs, the whole process from beginning to end of whatever you design as a system to be successful for yourself and for your customer and client. The next part is 8.4, which is about external products, services. Depending on the size of the company, depending on the business, they may have a ton of subcontractors. Some may not have any. I don't know. But many businesses out there subcontract something, whether it is to get materials, equipment, people. We have to ensure that whatever they're doing for us is successful for us, right? So you have to look at those subcontractors to see, okay, do they need to have their own quality system in place? Do they need to develop it against ISO principles, right? And then you verify what they put together. And you work on it together. And of course, you'll have to keep an eye on it. So it'll be audited. There may be times you have to go out to a site where they are creating a part or whatever it may be for you, and you have to verify things on ground to ensure that they are supplying you with the right stuff, right? So 8.4 is important, and it all depends on what the business has and needs. Not all of us as a business can do things internally. We have to go out to another third-party vendor to do things. So that's why this clause is incredibly important, especially if you do have subcontractors. So you have to determine what they need to be successful for you, because technically when you sub something out, you are now their client, even if you have a client or customer of your own, right? And you just need to work with them on ensuring that they have a good system in place, because you may have to build a quality system with them. The business may not quite understand what you need, and that's where you have to help them out. All right, but this is an incredibly important one, because I work with a lot of companies that we have as a subcontractor, and then they sub out some stuff as well. So we have a sub of a sub, right? So it's important to have something in place to ensure that they're giving you what you need for yourself and your customer and client. Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well out there. So the next several short videos are going to be on 8.5, which is another another long one because of the amount of subclauses within it. And a lot of this is kind of touching on stuff we already talked about. It feels like it's a duplication of effort, almost. But it is what it is. It's found within ISO. So for 8.5 itself, for the parent clause, you're looking at the service or product and service, I should say, provision. So a lot of this is looking at documentation. What do you have in place as a business to meet your customer and or client's requirements for whatever you're doing, whether you're creating something for them or providing them a service. So again, we kind of touched on this in numerous other videos. There's quite a few other previous clauses that touch on this. Documentation, of course, is very important. You have to have documentation to show that you're doing whatever you're supposed to be doing, that you're verifying it, you're checking it, throughout the steps, depending on, the scope of what you're doing. Ensuring that you're giving your customer and client what they need in the very end is very important. So you have to have means of verifying compliance and, of course, communication with your customer and client for any issues. But there's a number of subclauses under 8.5. I'll get into each of those in separate videos. But a lot of what we're going to talk about in those has already been brought up in previous videos. So not much of it is new. Some of it will be. All right. Hey, everyone. All right. So the last video I talked a little bit about 8.5 and how certain parts of it are kind of redundant. We've already gone over certain aspects in previous clauses. Then this video is actually going to be about the first subclause, 8.5.1, which is control of the product service provision. So whether you are providing a customer or client a service or you're creating a manufacturing a product, you have to have controls. So we've already talked about controls a lot, whether it's a documented process, a work instruction, whatever you may want to call it in your business, that ensures that you as a business are doing what you need to do for your customer and client, and that your employees have a process in writing on how they're going to achieve that, or you're using a system. Controls are important, that you are identifying everything that is needed, that you're verifying it, and you keep it up to date. All right. So again, control is very important. That's why it's brought up more than once in the different ISO clauses. Having a process written is very important, and most businesses, especially the ones that do a lot and have a lot of people, and you have to have different things within it to ensure that you're doing what you need to, period. All right. So that is the gist of this subclause. All right. Back with you to continue to discuss clause 8 in ISO 9001-2015, specifically 8.5.2. So we're continuing that 8.5 discussion. So 8.5.2 is about the identification and traceability of what you as a business are doing out there. And it can vary greatly depending on the business size and what you're doing. And this can also be for services and manufacturing. So oftentimes identification has to do with materials and equipment, property that a company is using. And some may have thousands. So you have to have a way to identify all that stuff, right? An inventory, a listing, so you know what is where. And it can be a lot, right? That's why it's important to have a documented system in place to keep an eye on all that. The traceability, and again, it depends on what it is for, but oftentimes it can be for an employee is using a piece of equipment on it, whatever it may be that they're working on, they're servicing. So a tool to fix equipment, right? So you have to have a way to show through documentation that that individual used that particular piece of equipment. And oftentimes, a lot of that equipment may need to be calibrated, which is another important thing, because if you have calibrated tools, then you need to keep that calibrated. So there's certain frequencies to do that. So it's important that, in that case, that you're documenting the calibration of the equipment, and that ensures that it's within scope. Because if you use something that's outside the calibration window and you're fixing something, well, you're technically non-compliant. So that's where the traceability comes into play. It's all about documentation, just like everything in ISO in reality. Documentation is very important. So ensuring that you are watching over all the varying equipment, materials, and property. Everything's identified and being managed, as well as traced to any individuals that are using it. It's all documented. All right. So this is an important piece of ISO, especially in certain fields where there's a lot of sensitivity with the equipment that they may be using. So it's important that you have that system in place, watched over, monitored, and tracked. All right. Hey there. So let's talk customer or third-party property. All right. So in a previous video, I briefly talked about customer property. That was actually when I was talking about identification and traceability. There may be times as a business you have either property from your customer or someone else that you are using, and there may be times you have their stuff that you're fixing, right? So there has to be measures in a business when that happens, that you ensure that property, that equipment, materials, software, whatever it may be from that customer and or third party is protected, right? You're safeguarding it. You're ensuring that whatever it is, equipment isn't left outside in the weather and gets ruined, right? So you have to have it stored in a certain way. So for your quality system, you have to have something in place to ensure that you are doing that. And oftentimes, again, it's documentation. If you are using customer property or even maintaining it, you have to have a record to list out all that stuff, so you know where it is, what it is. Even if you as a business doesn't have a property system in place to have a numbering system, most equipment, most materials of some sort, depending on what it is, has a serial number or some other identification. So you have to ensure that you're tracking it, protecting it. Sometimes you have to be doing inventories. It could be monthly, it could be annual. It depends on your property system. But it's all about ensuring that what you have in your business from your customer or a third party is being protected, stored, tracked, monitored, right? Because it's not your stuff, it's theirs. So you want to ensure that you are doing a good job for your customer in that aspect, so that they come back to you for whatever it is you do, right? Remember, it's not your stuff, it's not your property, it's theirs. So just remember, treat it as you would your own, right? All right, so I'm going to continue to discuss 8.5. All right, so this is, again, another long one. There's a lot of elements within this clause, so some of it has been repeats from other locations in ISO. Some are new, like this one I'm going to talk about. So 8.5.4 is about preservation. So if you are responsible for managing your customers' property, equipment, materials, whatever it may be, you have to ensure that you have something in place to safeguard it, to protect it, store it, so you're not going to damage it. Whether you need to document it or not depends on the business, the size of the business, the scope. As I've said in other videos, if you don't document it, it didn't happen. From an audit standpoint, especially if you want to follow ISO 9001 2015, you have to have something to show the auditor that you're achieving it. Oftentimes you'll have some kind of property plan, maybe something about materials. Depending on the size of your company, you may have a supply or transportation department, so you'll have different elements there that are going to do some aspects of this. So they may have something in writing in their documents to show that they are safeguarding, protecting, packaging the equipment the right way. Because, of course, the larger the business, the more people that work for that company, you have to have something to guide them. So a process, a work instruction, a standard operating procedure, whatever it may be, you have to have it in order for them to be successful for you as a business and in turn your customer and or client, right? So again, we've already touched on this a little bit in the last couple videos concerning property with the identification and traceability and all that other stuff. There's a lot that goes on in the property world. But in this case, you want to be successful for your customer. They gave you something, equipment, materials, whatever it is, they kind of expect it back the same way, right? So they are relying on you to do that. So however you set up your system, it has to be able to show that you are doing, you are achieving this requirement in ISO, all right? So however you do it, it needs to be known, especially from an audit standpoint, all right? Hey everyone. All right, so I'm going to continue to break down 8.5, specifically 8.5.5 for this video, which is post-delivery activities, which, again, going through 8.5, this is covering this, but in general, everything you're doing after the fact. So whatever you're doing for your customer and your client, whether it's a service, manufacturing a product, building something, you have to follow up afterwards for certain things. So it depends on the business, of course, what you're doing, the requirements from your customer and or client. You may have contractual requirements. So some examples may be if you have built something, a building, say, there may be warranty activities after that. If you have installed an HVAC unit or some other component, you may have warranty, but you also may have maintenance requirements after the fact. So after you have initially done whatever you were supposed to do, you may have to go back and continue to maintain that. You want to continue to follow up with your customer and or client because there may be some things that they want to bring up to you, feedback that you need to know about. So there are activities needed after you've done a service, right? That's the whole point of this clause. And again, at least from a quality standpoint, you have to have something documented to show those activities, especially if you want to have a total quality management system. If you're interested in certification in ISO, you have to be able to show something to, evidence, documented information-wise, whatever it may be that you're doing this, right? So there may be emails, there may be documents that are part of your internal process on how to handle these activities. You may have maintenance plans corresponding to these activities. If you have maintenance requirements for whatever you initially did, communication, you may have a communication plan that, again, talks about feedback with your customer. You may have it as part of your property management system. If you're dealing with your customer's property, there could be a number of things, right? So it's just important that you have something documented, that you are tracking the activities, that you know about them, that you're monitoring them, and you should be good to go. All right, so continuing the saga of clause 8.5. So this video is going to touch on 8.5.6, which, even though it's a new clause for ISO 9001 2015, it is a repeat of what I've already gone through in previous clauses. and that's control of change. So we've already talked about control of change. Now this again pertains to clause 8.5, or what we've been discussing, but change is change, so it has to be controlled in some manner. And I've already gone through that in more than one video. So for a quality system, you have to have something in place to control when changes are needed and when they happen. You have to communicate those changes. And again, oftentimes changes are documented in some way. You're changing something for someone for some reason. Customer, your client needs something changed. They communicate that with you. That's at least should be documented. Email. Oftentimes people get phone calls and it's not really documented in that way. So you should always follow up with an email so you're actually documenting the requirement. And then you're capturing the change in whatever it may be that you're doing for them. And again, especially for the larger businesses, they should be documented in some way in an internal process for the employees to use. So again, change happens. It's inevitable. You have to control it. You have to make sure it's documented, communicated. Because if people don't know of the change, you're going to have some problems, especially if the customer wants something drastically changed. You got to kind of let everyone know about that, right? So just remember, this is important. That's why it's brought up more than once in ISO. So, as I was about to make this video, I was thinking it seems like the folks that designed ISO 9001 2015 are in a competition with each other on which clause can be longer. Clause 7 or 8, because it seems like both are never ending, right? So we just finished 8.5. So the last video I had done completed 8.5. There's only 2 more left. There's 8.6 and 8.7. So this video, I'll touch on 8.6, which is release of the products or services. So we've talked about this in previous videos where you want to check what you're doing throughout the life of what you are doing, whether it's a service, you're manufacturing something, you're building something, designing something. You want to make sure that from the beginning to the end that you have checks and balances within your process, whatever it may be, work instruction, SOP, whatever, that helps your employees, guides your employees throughout the process to ensure that they are doing what they need to be doing per the requirements your customer and or client gave you. But there has to be verification and validations within to ensure that once you're done, whatever you are giving to your customer is what they want. We, as a business, should not be interested at all in giving our customer and or client something that's not correct, something that doesn't meet their requirements, because that's bad business, right? Basically, we want repeat customers, we want repeat business, but if we keep doing something, and heck, it can only be one time, and that might be enough. We don't want to give them something that is incorrect, not to their specs, not to their requirements, because they may talk to other companies and they say, hey, you don't want to work for these folks. They suck. They're going to give you crap. We don't want that as a business. We should always be striving for the best we can do and be. We should strive for excellence in everything we do. So just remember that before you give whatever it is to your customer and or client, that you're checking it to make sure it's correct, it meets all the requirements, that you have documentation records that essentially will show that is being done, which is actually going to be kind of part of clause 9, which is auditing. It's looking at all those documents and records, right? So ensure you have the process, make sure it is in line with the requirements from your customer or client. Make sure it's being checked, verified throughout the process, and give your customer and or client what they want, the way they want it every time. Hey everyone, so you've all made it through the review of Clause 8 of ISO 9001 2015. So we finally got through all the sub-clauses. Now we're at 8.7. That finishes it. And that is non-conforming outputs. So even though we've talked about checks and balances throughout the system and making sure we're on top of things do happen. We're not perfect. There will be non-conformances within what a business does. It doesn't matter what the business does, whether it's a service or manufacturer or building something, construction. So we all mess up. So it's all about identifying the non-conformance, containing it, making sure it doesn't spread, doesn't get out there, doesn't cause any more issues, and then correct the issue, and then ensure that a preventive action is put in place to never happen again. We never want a problem to impact our customer and our client. At least we shouldn't as a business. We don't want non-conformances out there. I would hope that the employees in the businesses also wouldn't want non-conformances out there. Otherwise, they may be in the wrong line of work. So it's all about having a system in place that will identify that problem, contain it, correct it, and prevent it from happening again. All right. We'll talk a little bit more on that in future videos as well, because there are certain actions that you need to do. I've had some previous videos on this topic, but I'll do it again. It's an important one. Whatever we do needs to be for the customer and or client and the way they want it. All right. Anyway, so in a previous video, I talked about 8.7, closing out Clause 8 of ISO 9001:2015, and that talked about non-conforming outputs. Before I jump into the next clause, Clause 9, I want to talk a little bit more about that, because in a video I did over a month ago, I talked about root cause and ensuring that corrective preventive actions are developed around the real problem. So 8.7 talked about developing corrective preventive actions against a non-conforming output. But if you don't do a good review to really find the problem, those corrective actions, preventive actions, are not going to fix the issue, and you're going to have issues creeping up again. So if you are in charge of that function that the non-conforming output occurred in, you may have a team to discuss it with, and get that shovel out and do some digging to get to the root cause. Because heck, I just saw one today from a company and their root cause using the 5 why method was 1 why, and we didn't follow the process. Okay, well heck, the second why is why didn't you, right? So it was funny because their corrective action was to create a process. Well, okay, so if you had a process and didn't follow it, why are you creating something new? So when I see those are examples that just tells me that they didn't really look at it the right way. And oftentimes, everyone's in a hurry. Depending on what you do as a business, you have a lot going on. And oftentimes the folks are like, I don't have time for this. Let me just throw something together, right? But you're going to be doing this again when it happens. That's a waste of resources. That's the opposite of quality. We don't want waste, right? We shouldn't as a business. It's a waste of time, money, and just resources in general, right? We have other things to do. So, take it seriously. Look at the actual non-conformance and just dig into it. Go walk through the workplace, walk through your processes. That's why it's important to have documents, because if you don't, those things will come up. Oftentimes I've seen employees get written up for not following a process that doesn't even exist, right? So you have to have something to help the employees, help you as a business be successful for your customer and client, right? So I just wanted to bring that up to everyone.